Veracruz, officially known as Heroica Veracruz, is a major port city and municipality on the Gulf of Mexico in the Mexican state of Veracruz. The city is located along the coast in the central part of the state, 90 kilometers southeast of the state capital Xalapa along Federal Highway 140. It is the state's most populous city, with a population that is greater than the municipality's population. As part of the city of Veracruz extends into the neighboring Boca del Río Municipality. At the 2010 census, the city had 554,830 inhabitants, 428,323 in Veracruz Municipality and 126,507 in Boca del Río Municipality. Developed during Spanish colonization, Veracruz has been Mexico's oldest, largest, and historically most significant port. When the Spanish explorer Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico in 1519, he founded a city here, which he named Heroica Veracruz, referring to the area's golden dedicated to the True Cross, because he landed on the Christian holy day of Good Friday, the day of the crucifixion. It was the second Spanish settlement on the mainland of the Americas, but the first to receive a coat of arms. During the colonial period, this city had the largest mercantile class and was at times wealthier than the capital of Mexico City. Its wealth attracted the raids of 17th-century pirates, against which fortifications such as Fort San Juan de Ulloa were built. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Veracruz was invaded on different occasions by France and the United States. During the 1914 Tampico Affair, U.S. troops occupied the city for 7 months. For much of the 20th century, the production of petroleum was most important for the state's economy, but in the latter 20th century and into the 21st, the port has re-emerged as the main economic engine. It has become the principal port for most of Mexico's imports and exports, especially for the automotive industry. Veracruz has a blend of cultures, mostly indigenous, ethnic Spanish and Afro-Cuban. The influence of these three is best seen in the food and music of the area, which has strong Spanish, Caribbean and African influences. Etymology. The name Veracruz derives from the Latin Vera Crux. Having established the settlement of Heroica on Good Friday 1519, Cortés dedicated the place to the True Cross as an offering. History. The Spanish captain Juan de Grijalva, along with Bernal Diaz del Castillo, first arrived in 1518 at the island later known as San Juan de Ulloa. The Spanish gave it that name because they landed on the Christian feast of John the Baptist, and in honor of the captain. De Ulloa is derived from the local name for the Aztecs, Coluja or Acalua. According to tradition, when the Spanish arrived, they found 2 young men who had been sacrificed. When they asked the locals what had happened, they said the Aztecs had ordered the sacrifice. The word for Aztec evolved into Ulloa, because the first expedition detected the presence of gold in the region. A second expedition under the command of Hernán Cortés arrived in 1519. Cortés and his men landed at the shore opposite the island where Grijalva had moored, which has the pre-Hispanic name of Chalchihuacan. Cortés, Francisco de Montejo and Alonso Hernández Puerto Carrero founded the settlement, naming it Heroica Veracruz. The name Heroica referred to the gold that was found here, and Veracruz was added because the Cortés expedition landed on Good Friday, a Christian holy day. When Cortés and his soldiers elected a Justicia Mayor and a Capitan General, they created the first city council on the American continent. The city was the first on mainland America to receive a European coat of arms, which was authorized by Carlos V in Valladolid, Spain on 4 July 1523. The original settlement was moved to what is now known as Antigua, a at the mouth of the Huitzilpan shortly thereafter. This separated the city from the port, as ships could not enter the shallow river. Ships continued to dock at San Juan de Ulúa, with small boats being used to ferry goods on and off the ships. When large-scale smuggling of goods took place to avoid customs officials, the Spanish crown ordered the settlement returned to its original site to cut down on the traffic. Docks and an observation tower were constructed on the island to ensure the goods went through customs officials. As in other parts of Mexico, the indigenous peoples suffered from epidemics of European infectious diseases and maltreatment, which decimated the population after contact. The Spanish began to import African slaves via the port of Veracruz to work on sugarcane plantations. In the 16th century, this state had more slaves than any other in Mexico. Before the slave trade was abolished, Mexico had the second highest population of African slaves in the Americas, following Brazil. By the end of the 16th century, the Spanish had constructed roads to link Veracruz with other cities such as Córdoba, Orizaba, Puebla, Xalapa and Perote. Their gold and silver were the principal exports. This caused the city problems with pirates, prompting the construction of Fort San Juan de Ulúa on the island where Grijalva had landed in the mid-16th century. Major public buildings were constructed at the beginning of the 17th century. The municipal palace, the monastery of Nuestra Señora de la Merced, and the hospital de Nuestra Señora de Loreto. In 1618, a fire nearly reduced much of the city to ashes. In 1640, the Barlovento Armada was stationed here for additional defense against pirates. Through the rest of the colonial period, this was the most important port in New Spain, with a large wealthy merchant class that was more prosperous than that of Mexico City. The pirates Van Horn, Lawrence de Graaf and Michel de Grammont attacked Veracruz in 1683. The 19th century was marked by armed conflicts. During the Mexican War of Independence, Spain placed troops here to maintain Mexico City's sea link with Spain. In 1816, Antonio López de Santa Anna commanded royalist troops countering the insurgency. In 1820, insurgents took the city, despite Santa Anna's attempts to stop them. The last viceroy of New Spain, Juan O'Donoghue, arrived here in 1821, where he signed the Treaty of Córdoba with Agustín de Iturbide at Fort San Juan de Ulúa. In 1823, Spanish troops remaining at Fort San Juan de Ulúa fired on the newly independent Mexican city of Veracruz. The city's defense against the attack earned its first title of Heroic City. Quote, during the Pastry War in 1837, the city mounted a defense against a French attack, and earned its second title of Heroic City. In 1847, during the Mexican-American War, United States forces invaded the city. It was defended by Generals Juan Morales and José Juan de Landero, but they were forced to surrender a few days later. The government of Mexico recognized Veracruz with a third title of Heroic City. 10 years later, civil war between liberals and conservatives forced Benito Juárez's government to flee the capital of Mexico City. Juárez went to Veracruz and governed from there in 1857. In 1861, Spain sent its troops to occupy the port in an effort to secure payment of debts, which Juárez had suspended. French military forces accompanied them to prepare for Maximiliano and occupied the city when the emperor and his wife Carlota of Belgium arrived. In 1864, the conflicts and damaged trade relations with Europe took its toll on the port of Veracruz. By 1902, the port facilities had deteriorated, and it was considered one of the most dangerous on the American coast. President Porfirio Diaz contracted with foreign enterprises to modernize the port's infrastructure. In 1914, during the Mexican Revolution, the U.S. attacked and occupied the port in an effort to try to preserve trade. The city gained its fourth title of Heroic City. After the Revolution, most port workers became unionized. Through most of the 20th century, federal and state legal and political initiatives intended to better workers' lives had effects on the operations of the port. Eventually, unions came to have great power over the operations and tariffs charged. By the latter part of the 20th century, competing unions made the operations of the port difficult. Some blocked access to the port from federal roads, and financial corruption was a problem. In the 1970s, a federal commission was established to design a new administrative system for the ports of Mexico. The legislature passed laws authorizing the federal government to take control over important ports such as Veracruz. The federal government modernized the port, adopting automation of loading and unloading. This resulted in a reduction of 80% of the port's jobs and labor resistance through strikes. The dockworkers' unions unified, negotiating for members to have a stake in a new company to manage the port's functions. Named the Empresa de Servicios Portuarios de Veracruz, SA.C.V. The old Compañía Terminal de Veracruz was dissolved in 1988 and the new organization was fully in place by 1991. In September 2010, Hurricane Carl, a small, strong Category 3 hurricane, caused widespread flooding and damage affecting approximately 500,000 people. 16 were confirmed dead with another 11 missing. 65 municipalities in the state were declared disaster areas. Preliminary damage estimates total up to $3.9 billion USD and $50 billion MXN. Much of the most recent commercial development has been in newer areas in the south of the city and in the neighboring municipality of Boca del Rio, linked by a 10-kilometer road along the shore that caters to tourists and business travelers. The hotels in Veracruz are more rustic and traditional. The modern ones are in Boca del Rio, especially near Playa Mocambo. Notable sites. Veracruz is not as popular a tourist destination as many other resort areas, but the city has been promoting an identity as a tourist destination, emphasizing new attractions such as the Veracruz Aquarium and the City Museum, and the renovation of historic ones, such as Fort San Juan de Ulua and the Naval Academy. The cultural center of the city is its main plaza, officially named Plaza de las Armas but commonly called the Zocalo. This tree-shaded square, in which have camped a number of foreign invading armies, is occupied from morning to night with people playing dominoes, selling food, cigars, etc., playing music, dancing and other activities. It is more crowded in the evening, when nearly every night the danzón is danced. This dance was brought over to Mexico from Cuba by refugees in the 1870s. It was originally restricted to the lower classes but eventually gained accepted by all levels of society. The danzón is sponsored by several dance schools dedicated to keeping the tradition alive. Around the plaza are numerous shops and restaurants, as well as the municipal palace and the cathedral. The municipal palace was built for the city council in 1608. The building was extensively remodeled in the 18th century. Its architectural style is a sober Baroque with a tower at one of the corners. Lookouts used this tower to keep watch on the ships entering and leaving the port. It has a large courtyard surrounded by wide arches and is the oldest city government building in Mexico. The Cathedral of Veracruz, named Catedral de la Virgen de la Asunción, is also located on the Zocalo. This cathedral was begun in the 17th century and finished in 1731. It was modified in the 19th century but was not designated as a cathedral until 1963. The building has 5 naves, with an octagonal cupola covered in Puebla tiles. The tower was begun in the early 20th century and has its own small cupola. The main facade is neoclassic with 2 levels and a crest. The lower level contains an arched entrance flanked by 2 Doric columns, and the upper level contains the choral window, above which is a medallion. The interior is simple with crystal candelabras. In the port area are the Pemex Tower, the old lighthouse, which was the seat of government for Veneziano Carranza, and the Crafts Market. On Marina Mercante Street are located the old Customs Building, the Postal and Telegraph Twin Buildings, as well as the old railroad terminal. In the 1920s, passenger traffic was such that the station had its own hotel. The Juarez Hemicycle Monument stands in front of the Civil Registry Building, which contains the first birth certificate issued in the country. The Malecon stretches for kilometers along the Gulf of Mexico, leading from the city center into the suburbs. This area is popular at night, when people stroll and exercise, enjoying the ocean breezes. Near the city center, the Malecon is crowded with merchants selling knickknacks, souvenirs, jewelry made with seashells, and T-shirts. Fort San Juan de Ulua is located on an island, now connected to land of the same name. The island is part of the Liga coral reef and has about 2,500 meters of beach. The full reef covers about 100 hectares and varies in depth between 60 and 90 centimeters, forming a natural break. In the pre-Hispanic era, this island was a sanctuary dedicated to the god Tezcatlipoca. The site where the Spanish first landed has been developed over the centuries and today serves as the container ship terminal of the port. Most of the island is occupied by the fort. This fort was built where the Spanish first landed to conquer Mexico. They used it for their last defense during and just after the Mexican War of Independence. Between these periods, the fort helped defend the city against piracy and later was used for prisoners and interrogations of the Mexican Inquisition. The fort was begun here in 1582 to protect the city from pirates and was enlarged in 1635 during the period of frequent pirate raids. It was finished in 1707. After the War of Independence ended in 1821, the Spanish kept control of the island and fort, and occasionally bombarded Mexican forces on land. They finally transferred this area to Mexico in 1825. The fort was used in 1838 during the Pastry War with the French. In 1847, it was used for an unsuccessful defense of the port when United States forces invaded during the Mexican-American War. In the 19th century, the fort was converted into a military prison. The fort's narrow stone passageways lead to a series of dungeons with walls 24 feet thick in some places. Those cells which were darker and hotter were reserved for those charged with more serious crimes. A few of the most dreaded dungeons were nicknamed Heaven, Purgatory, and Hell. Some of prison's more famous prisoners include Fray Servando Teresa de Mier and Benito Juarez, both political prisoners. But the most famous is Jesus Arriaga, better known as Chacho El Roto. Most people visit San Juan de Ulua out of attraction to the legend of this 19th-century bandit. Jesus Arriaga, better known as Chacho El Roto, was held at Fort San Juan de Ulua where he died. It is not known whether he died of natural causes, as a result of a fight with other prisoners or by other means. Chacho was a Robin Hood figure who lived during the 19th century. He stole from the rich and gave to the poor, inspiring songs and poetry such as the verses penned by Rafael Desires Enriquez. Chacho was arrested in Querétaro after a jewelry store heist. He was sent to the Belon prison in Mexico City, then to Veracruz. He was also renowned as a seducer of women, especially those who were rich and lonely. Most of his targets were jewelry shops, pawn shops and the homes of the wealthy. Along with Fort San Juan de Ulua, the city used to be walled in for protection against pirates and invasions. All that is left of these city walls is the baluarte, a small fortress. The 1635 structure has thick, sturdy walls with cannons directed to cover sea approaches. Inside is a small museum featuring a collection of high-quality pre-Hispanic jewelry discovered in the 1970s by a fisherman. The Veracruz Aquarium was built in 1992 and is the largest and most important in Latin America. The Freshwater Gallery consists of 13 exhibitions containing 562,177 liters of water. These exhibitions contain aquatic species from Asia, Africa, South America, as well as Mexico. The reef tank is best known for its sharks. The Saltwater Gallery contains 14 tanks with tanks dedicated to the species of Veracruz, the Red Sea and the Pacific Ocean. Another exhibit is devoted to sharks, containing 25 species that swim around visitors as they walk through a glass tunnel built through the tank. There is also an exhibit dedicated entirely to manatees. The Heroica Escuela Naval was founded here in 1897 by José María de Vega, then Secretary of the Navy. The school was founded because at the time, Mexico was dependent on the hiring of foreign sailors and foreign training of its officers to staff its navy. Prior attempts to establish an academy had failed. Porfirio Diaz approved the institute to train both Navy and Merchant Marine officers to be based on similar schools in Western Europe. The City Museum is located at the intersections of Zaragoza and Esteban Morales streets in the historic center. It is housed in a two-story building which is of neoclassic design, built between the mid and latter 19th century. The main facade on Zaragoza Street has an enormous main door with posts framed by Ionic pilasters, which reach to the upper floor, and topped by a pediment and a cornice. The building was originally constructed as an asylum. When the French invaded Veracruz in 1861, the building was commandeered for other purposes until 1870. The asylum took it back and operated here for almost 100 years. New facilities were constructed for it south of the city, and a building was renovated for adaptive reuse as a museum. The City Museum was inaugurated in 1970 and contains exhibits relating to the history of Veracruz. The Agustín Lara House Museum exhibits works, photographs and personal effects of the poet Agustín Lara. Located in what was his house in Boca del Rio just outside Veracruz City. News clips, caricatures and a replica of the radio studio where he hosted La Horazel are among the items on display. Lara was one of the city's most famous sons as a popular songwriter and singer in Mexico. He began his career playing the piano in brothels and later became a bullfighter. Lara had 7 wives, one of whom was Mexican screen diva Maria Ladonia Felix, for whom he wrote the song Maria Bonita. To be a gentleman, when he and Felix were about to break up, he married her to make an honest woman of her, even though they had lived together for years. Veracruz is primarily a commercial port, but it has some beaches and other sea attractions. Controversy has accompanied the clean-up of the island called Isla de Sacrificios, which lies just off the coast of the city and measures 450 meters long and 198 meters wide. The island is part of a system of 23 coral reefs called the Veracruz Reef System, which is protected as a national park. Visitors can kayak to the Isla de Sacrificios to observe seagulls, pelicans and the fish that inhabit the coral reef. In 1983, a study and initial clean-up project was undertaken at the island, which collected 50 tons of trash. Shortly thereafter, the island was closed to the public, and since then, there has been a struggle among authorities, tour operators and fishermen as to the fate and uses of the island. There are those who would like to build hotels, restaurants and other facilities for ecotourism. However, access to the island has been restricted to research, teaching and the occasional sporting event. Other small islands and shoals off the coast include Isla de Remedio, Isla Verde, Anegada de Adentro, Santiaguillo and Anegada de Afuera, the last two next to Anton Lizardo Beach. All of them are included within the Sistema Arrecife Veracruzano National Park and make fine sites for scuba diving. Several operators in Veracruz and in Boca del Rio offer scuba equipment and tours. The best season for scuba diving is May to August. For 400 years, the island has suffered ecologically from pollution related to development, as well as the pillaging of its coral reefs and archaeological pieces. Current pollution problems are mostly due to untreated wastewater that flows into the ocean from the city and the polluted Xalapa River. Its coastline has been modified and more than 200 hectares of reefs in its littoral zone have been pillaged. Coral and other marine species have been taken for commercial and craft purposes, as well as by fishermen. Some of these coral reefs have already died due to pollution. Since the island was closed, there has been some revival of marine life. Ruins here have not been extensively studied but cover more than 700 years of history. In the pre-Hispanic era, the island was considered sacred and a sanctuary on which to perform religious rites. Human sacrifice was frequently performed and the remains buried here. A small altar is referred to in historic sources, but it had not been found. The Spanish built a hospital here, but all that remains is part of one wall. Later, a storage faculty to store gunpowder was built, as well as an obelisk during the French intervention, but these have crumbled as well. The only surviving structure is a small lighthouse. About 800 archaeological artifacts have been partially excavated on the island but cannot be exhibited because the humidity and weather would damage them. Reopening the island is difficult because the ecosystem here is delicate, and any construction could damage archaeological sites and valuable pieces. Any plans to reopen the island to visitors will require the collaboration of the Veracruz Reef System Park, to which it belongs, as well as Secretariat of the Navy, INAH, the Veracruz Aquarium and other government agencies negotiating with the local associations of hotels, tour operators and fishermen. So far, government agencies have blocked efforts to develop anything on the island. An ecotourism project consisting of guided tours is considered the most viable, such as that proposed by the Veracruzano University and the aquarium. But there is concern on the part of INAH and the Secretariat of the Navy. The mainland has several beaches. Playa Marti is located between the city of Veracruz and Boca del Rio, 5 km from the historic center. This beach also has goals and nets for football and volleyball games. The Playa de Hornos is located next to the Veracruz Aquarium. It is safe to swim here. Amenities include tables, chairs and umbrellas to rent, as well as food stands. During the high seasons, lifeguards are on duty. Banana boats may be rented. There are also boats that take tourists to the island of Sacrificio and Canoncito. Villa del Mar is just south of Playa de Hornos and is more popular.